Today, I want to start. Do we have any English majors in the room? Any? Okay, few of you. It's proud. Be proud, because there's only like 3 of you. We'll start a support group, okay? So be proud. That's a hard major. If you're an English major, you're going to get this. For the rest of you, I'm going to catch you up on it, all right? Do you know what an oxymoron is? You know what an oxymoron is? Don't point. That's not what it is. An oxymoron is when you take 2 terms, you combine terms, but individually the terms shouldn't be together. They contradict each other, but we tend to combine terms all the time and use it. I'll give you an example that'll make this obvious. Jumbo shrimp is an example of an oxymoron, okay? Jumbo shrimp shouldn't go together, but we put it together and use it all the time. Here's another one. Plastic silverware. That makes no sense when you think about it, but we do that all the time. Working vacation. Some of you think that's the only vacation. You really should. Those 2 shouldn't go together. Go on vacation, just stop working. What's the other one we got here? Oh, you teach. I don't know. Guys, I see some orange out. I'm sorry. I see that orange. I know. I don't know who put that on there. It was not me. After the game last night, I would not have done that, all right? Because y'all won. You won. Congratulations. Those are funny ones. All right? Here's one that I want us to talk about today that's not quite as funny, but may be a little surprising to you. This is also an oxymoron. Generous Christians. You're like, whoa, I thought all Christians were generous. You know, that's what we all think of. If we're a Christian, we think of ourselves as generous. It's actually a little bit of an oxymoron, and the reason I tell you that is because of the data. So before I show you the data, let's just play a little game. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. I'm going to ask them one at a time, and I'm going to let you guess and tell somebody who you're sitting with or sitting next to. Y'all can kind of come up with an answer you think is accurate, okay? So here's the first question. What percentage of the average American's annual income do you think they give away every year? Okay, let me ask again. What percentage, is it 5%, 1%, 10%, what percentage of the average American, not Christian, just the average American's income, do you think they give away every year? I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. Turn to the people around you and go ahead and come up with a guess. All right. They just recently came out with a new study that gave us all of this info. But honestly, this hasn't changed a lot over the years. Here's the answer. The average American gets 2.5% of their income annually. Anybody get it right? Anybody? Okay, yeah. Anybody get close? Do y'all get close maybe? 2.5%. Which this doesn't surprise me at all. And I'll tell you why. If you're not a follower of Jesus, I don't fault you at all for this, because if I was not a follower of Jesus, if I didn't have a Jesus-informed value system that made me think about generosity differently, this is where I think I would land. And the reason I think I would land there is because if you're not following Jesus and you feel like you are completely responsible to take care of yourself and your needs and your family. So if I wasn't following Jesus and had all that in the equation, what I would do is I would want to be a generous person, but I would have to take care of myself first and my family first, all the things that might pop up. And then when I got done, if I had anything left over, by all means, I would give it and help somebody else, because I would want to be generous and I'd want to help people. So, if you're not a Christian and this is you, no criticism at all. I totally understand why you would land this way. Here's the second question I want to ask, and I'll let y'all guess this one, okay? You can see where this is going. What do you think the percentage is of the annual income that Christians in America give away every year? What percentage of a Christian's annual income do you think they give away? Go ahead, take a guess, talk to whoever's around you, see if you can figure that one out. Okay, are we ready? Let's see how you did. The average Christian gives 2.5% of their income annually. Was not a trick question. This was not a trick question. Now this one makes me pause, and if you're not a Christian and you're here and you're like, you're just all a bunch of hypocrites. You're right, we are. The data proves it. We're a bunch of hypocrites, because here's the difference. We actually say we value generosity and it's something that we want to practice, and we tout ourselves as generous people. And yet the data just came out this year. The data shows that our generosity is exactly the same as people who have no faith and don't even believe in God. That's interesting, isn't it? How is that possible? How is that possible? How is it that we have, and again, I'm not criticizing, I'm just asking a question. How is it that we as Christians have been given so much, and I'm just not talking monetarily, but how is it that we follow a God who has been so extraordinarily generous to us, and yet we turn around and we give so little? We practice such small generosity. How is there no difference at all between somebody who doesn't have Jesus' value system and somebody who claims that they do? That is the question that I want us to try to get to the bottom of today. That's the question I want us to drill into, because here's what I know. Every single one of us has good intentions when it comes to generosity. All of us do. Every one of us has good intentions. But clearly there is something getting between our intentions and our actions. So what is the thing? If you're not a Christian, again, you got lots of good reasons as to why something should get in between those two. But for those of us who are Christians, why would we say we want to be generous and we value this and we're following Jesus who is, so generous? How could we have these kinds of intentions and yet our actions not look any different from somebody who doesn't follow Jesus? What could possibly be getting in the way of us doing what we say we want to do and being who we claim we want to be? If you're just joining us, we're in the last week of this series, Money Monsters. We've been talking about some skills to slay these monsters, and I'll give you some context real quick. The whole idea of the series is that being good with money isn't just about knowing what to do with your money. Now, that's important. Everybody needs to know how to manage money well and be wise with it. But being good with money doesn't mean that you just know what to do with your money. Being good with money also means you know what your money is doing to you. And money's a great thing. I got no problem with it. I hope you get more of it. But money does some things to us because money brings some monsters along, if you will. Some things that have a tendency to pull us in a direction that we don't want to go, but we don't even know we're getting pulled. I've likened it to a current in a river or current in an ocean. You know how it is. You get in there and you just start doing whatever. You don't have to do anything to feel the current. It's there. You're just going to feel it. If you don't want the current to cause you to drift down the beach, you've got to be intentional about making sure that doesn't happen. And in the same way, when you have money, and all of us have some amount, when you have money, there are some pulls, if you will. There's a current that comes along with that. If you're not intentional, it's going to drag you in a certain direction to where your heart becomes a certain way, which will then impact your relationships. It'll impact your decision making. All that'll happen. You won't even realize it's happening. As a matter of fact, when you end up with problems or issues or tension or stress in other areas of your life, your marriage, your parenting, your family, your friendships, whatever, you probably won't be able to connect the dots that the tension you're feeling here is actually connected to what money has done to your heart, because you just don't see it. It's so hard to see. But I'm telling you, money, and this is what makes it so powerful, the pull or the impact of money is never contained to your bank account. You know this. It does change your heart. It changes your character, which impacts every area that really matters most to you in life. So this series has been all about just helping us see what these monsters are that tend to pull us in direction and come up with a plan that if you choose to, you can be intentional about not letting these monsters pull you in a way you don't want to go. So quick review for everybody. The first monster we talked about, or the first two we talked about in week 1, were pride and the pursuit of more. Okay, these are the monsters that are on the surface of the water. They are fairly easy to see. So you know this. Whenever you get a little more money, whatever a little more means to you, whenever you get a little more money, there is a temptation, isn't there, to start looking to your right and your left and compare yourself to other people. And before you know it, money can make you a little arrogant. It can make you a little proud. You can feel like you're a little better than somebody. In the same respect, the more money you get, this is odd, but the more money you get, the more money you tend to want. The less content you tend to become. And part of the reason for that is we all have a tendency to put our hope in what we have. And by that I mean, no matter how much money we have, we're thinking, okay, I want to protect myself, insulate myself, ensure myself from any risk of possible harm or trouble in the future. And that's a challenging thing to do, because you can always dream up something that could happen to you that you don't have enough money currently to take care of. So there's always this what if deal. Well, I need a little bit more because what if? I need a little bit more because what if? And I have just found in talking to people who have extremely large amounts of money that never goes away. That's always there. And so money can start pulling you to the point that you're hoping in your stuff and you're hoping in yourself to get enough stuff to protect yourself. But you can't win at that game. So it creates constant anxiety or tension or discontent, however it manifests itself in you. So those are the first two. They're fairly obvious to see. But if you go a little deeper under the water, you find the third money monster we talked about last week, which is simply greed. Greed is the assumption that everything I have is for my consumption, that whatever I get, whatever's put in my hands, it must be for me. You know you've got a little greed rattling around inside of you whenever your first thought, whenever you get something is, well, what can I do with this for myself? How can this benefit me? And all of us struggle with that. It's a little harder to see. It's a little harder to spot and define because we often feel like we're being responsible or feel like we're being careful, but what we're actually doing is we're being greedy. And again, you know this. I don't have to tell you. Greed has a way of impacting our relationships, but you can't see it. You don't know what greed's doing to you, but it impacts the way you treat and relate to and interact with other people. Today we're going to talk about this final money monster. This is the one that all of us will be able to relate to. This is the one that I don't think any of us can possibly escape. It's simply the monster of fear. Fear. I think fear is at the root of why there is no difference between the generosity of Christians and people who aren't Christians. I think fear is the thing that stands between our intentions and our actions. Fear is actually what fuels, what drives, what feeds greed, pride, and a pursuit of more. It's always fear. Fear is that thing that's way down deep in our hearts, and none of us want to acknowledge it's there, but all of us know it's there because we feel it. We run into it all the time. Fear is the thing that causes us, whenever we're confronted or are presented an opportunity to be generous, fear is the thing that drives all the questions and narrative in our head that causes us not to be generous, even though we want to be, even though we say it matters to us, even though we care about making a difference in that situation. Now, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, I think this is really important for us to understand. You can't follow Jesus without interacting with your fears. Following Jesus, this is important. Following Jesus increases your exposure to potential fears. And anybody who's ever stood on a stage like this and told you otherwise was lying to you. Because when you follow Jesus, you are going to run into more fears, not less. I'll explain why. You've heard me talk about this before. The thing that Jesus cares about most, the thing that matters the most to him, is the level of trust that you have in your relationship with him. That's what he cares about. And the reason Jesus cares so much about that is because trust is the foundation for any healthy relationship. Now, take it out of the spiritual realm and just think about your relationships you have. You know this. The more you trust someone, the closer you are to them. The more you trust someone, the stronger the relationship is. But you also know the only way you can trust someone or learn to trust someone is to trust someone. I mean, you have to do it. The whole point is, I don't know if you're trustworthy until I trust you, and then you prove whether you're trustworthy or not. And if you do, then we're good. But that's challenging. That's challenging in any of our relationships because trust means, by definition, that there is uncertainty. If I have to trust you with something, I'm trusting you because I'm actually not certain if you're going to do what I think you're going to do or what you promised to do. There's uncertainty involved. And with uncertainty comes what? Fear. You can't have uncertainty without fear. So in your relationship with Jesus, it's the same way. Because trust is the foundation for any healthy relationship, and the more you trust Jesus, the stronger your relationship becomes, the more you grow. Well, that means Jesus is always going to be leading you into areas of uncertainty. He's always going to be asking you. It doesn't matter if it's generosity or forgiveness or you name the thing. Whatever Jesus asks us to do is something that creates uncertainty. Because if we were certain, if I do that thing Jesus said, of course it's going to work out. If we were certain of that, there would be no need for trust. The very fact that we aren't sure it's going to work out is why we have to trust. But with that uncertainty comes fear. So when you follow Jesus, he's always increasing the risk of your potential fears, your exposure to these potential fears. And you have to decide whether you're going to trust him or not. The exact same thing is true when it comes to generosity. All of us want to be generous people. Why aren't we? Well, because with generosity comes uncertainty, and with uncertainty comes fear, and those fears are the things that always hit the brakes and paralyze us and keep us from making the impact, from being the generous people we want to be. So how do you navigate through that? Well, Let me show you an example from the first century. I want to take you all the way back to AD 55. And here's what was happening. Second great famine had struck Jerusalem, Judea, all that surrounding area. It had not struck all of the Middle East, but it struck this part. And I'm not going to go into all the details behind it, but it was difficult and it was challenging for those people because they didn't have the wealth we had and they obviously didn't have the systems we had to store food. So this could get devastating in a hurry, and it was. Well, something very unique happened. North of Jerusalem, north by quite a ways, there were some Christians in the city of Corinth who were part of the church there who heard about what was happening in Jerusalem. Now, the thing you have to remember, we're so interconnected in our world today. We know about everything happening everywhere, it feels like. But in that day and time, Jerusalem to Corinth, which was up in Greece, those people in Corinth might as well have been on the other side of the world. I mean, these people didn't know each other. They didn't interact with each other. It was a long trip, and so they weren't going back and forth, seeing one another. That was rare. But these Corinthians, probably through the Apostle Paul, they hear about the famine and the suffering that these people in Jerusalem were enduring. And these Corinthians do something that is quite remarkable. Even though they had never met these people, even though they probably would never meet these people, they look at Paul and they say, we want to help these people. Those people in Jerusalem shouldn't suffer. Those people in that area shouldn't suffer needlessly. Here's what we're going to do, Paul. We're going to gather up as much money as we can gather. We're going to give as big as we can give, and they promise an amount. And we're going to send it back to Jerusalem with you. But we need some time because, again, they didn't have bank accounts with, all this cash back here. So they're like, we need some time to be able to save up enough to set this offering aside to be able to provide food and support to these people suffering. And Paul is blown away. So they come up with a plan. Paul's like, okay, I'm going to go talk to some of the other churches in Greece and in this region, and we'll see if they want to do it too. But every church that wants to do it, I'm going to ask for one or two of the guys from that church to travel with me. And we're going to form a little team that comes back through later. We collect all the money, and then we take it to Jerusalem. And that was important for a couple reasons. One, you didn't want to travel with a lot of money back then. It was super risky, very dangerous. So this would provide a little safety. And secondly, for Paul, this was a little bit of accountability just to make sure, he didn't end up on a Grecian beach somewhere. It's like, no, I delivered it. I had a whole crew here who watched me, okay? So they're just being careful about it. So sure enough, a couple Corinthians go with Paul. They leave. They're going to give several months for the Corinthians to save up this money. So Paul leaves Corinth in Greece. He goes up to Macedonia in Greece. When he gets to Macedonia, he tells the Christians there all about what the Corinthians are doing to help the people in Jerusalem. And they're like, oh, we're in too. So he gets a couple guys from that church. He says, we'll be back in a little while. He goes over to Turkey, to the region of Galatia. There were a lot of churches in that region. He does the same thing there. They're like, oh, we're in too. They've heard all this. But while he's in Galatia, word gets back to him. We don't know if it was a letter or somebody showed up, but word gets back to him. Paul, we have a little problem. Those Corinthians who made that big promise of that big gift and their generosity? Yeah, I was just blown away by it. Well, they're getting cold feet. And I'm not sure they're going to actually give. They haven't been saving up the money the way they told you they were going to. So you're going to show back up, and they're going to have nothing for the Jerusalem people. So Paul realizes what's going on, and he writes them a letter to try to encourage them. And he sends it with a couple of the guys from his team and says, y'all go on ahead to Corinth. You give them this letter. You kind of get this thing jump-started because when I get there, I don't want to be bad. And so we're just going to jump right in the middle of this letter because the advice Paul gives them on how to move through their fear is the exact same advice that will help us if we want to be generous people. So here's what he tells them. He writes, for I know your eagerness to help. I know how excited y'all were to give. And I've been boasting about it to the Macedonians, telling them that since last year, you and Achaia, that was the region around Corinth, were ready to give, and your enthusiasm, it has stirred most of these Macedonians to action. So there's a little healthy competition going on here, and I don't think that's a bad thing when it comes to generosity. Basically, Paul showed up and said, you Macedonians want to help? And they're like, well, we might do something. And he said, well, those Corinthians, I know they're not nearly as good folks as y'all, but let me tell you what they're giving. And the Macedonians are like, oh, they ain't giving more than us. That's kind of how it worked, okay? So the Macedonians have been all inspired by what they're doing. The Galatians have been all inspired by what these Corinthians are doing. So Paul says, hey, Corinthians, I just want you to know, your generosity's inspired a lot more generosity. I've been telling everybody, I've been bragging to everybody about you. But, he says, But I am sending the brothers, these guys he sent on ahead to Corinth, I'm sending them in order that our boasting about you in this matter will not prove hollow. He goes on, he says, but that you may be ready as I said you would be. For, he goes on, if any Macedonians come with me and they find you unprepared, and they're Macedonians coming with him, right? Part of his team now. He says, if we get to Corinth and we find you unprepared, we, not to say anything about you, would be ashamed of having been so confident. He says, all right, I've been telling them about what you were going to do. And I'm just telling you, if we get there and you backed out and you're not as generous as you promised you were going to be, oh my gosh, he said, I'm going to be embarrassed. You're going to be embarrassed. I don't want that for any of us. So he gives them a little bit of a plan and a pep talk. He says, so I thought it necessary, go on to the next slide there, Jackson. I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to visit you in advance and to finish the arrangements for the generous gift that you had promised. And then, he says, it will be ready as a generous gift, not as one grudgingly given. So this is important. Paul's like, okay, I hear you guys have gotten scared and you don't really want to give this gift anymore. So I want to encourage you to give it, and I want to give you some time to kind of get your heart and your mind back in the right place where when you give it, I don't want to show up and feel like I'm prying this money out of your hands. I want to show up and you be excited to give this gift. The problem is, at the moment, the Corinthians are not excited to give the gift. I think we can all relate to that, can't we? It's like, just don't, I don't feel good about it. Let me tell you why there was so much fear for them. Let me explain why there's so much fear for you. The problem with generosity is it's in direct conflict with our desire for self-preservation. This is the problem with generosity. It's always in conflict with our desire for self-preservation. In other words, we all feel this weight to make sure we take care of ourselves and our family and the people we love. There's something wired into us, I gotta think about me first, and I want to be generous, but once I'm sure that I've taken care of me, then I can help somebody else. This self-preservation desire is what creates all the fear in you. It's what creates all the fear in me. And it's this piece of the puzzle that explains the narrative that goes on in our head whenever we have an opportunity to be generous or whenever we think about practicing generosity as a lifestyle. You know the narrative, that we all have it. What if? You get an opportunity, you think I could, but then you start thinking, what if? And your what if may be different than mine. It depends on what we value. But you have thought things before, like I would love to do that. I would love to give that. But what if we need that money down the road? What if something happens? What if we have some home repairs? I don't think I have enough to cover all home repairs, because what if, I have to replace the roof and the AC unit goes out and the foundations need to be fixed and you just come up with this scenario. It's crazy because it's not going to all happen at once, but what if it did? I don't have enough money. What if I can't provide for my kids? What if all the other parents are letting their kids go on that trip or do that thing, and we would, because I gave this, wouldn't have the money to send the, oh my gosh, that'd be terrible. What if? We just come up, what if I don't have enough for retirement? What if I run out of money in retirement? What if we come up with all of these different what ifs. And it's simply fear driven by our need for self-preservation. And so because of that, we talk ourselves out of being the people that we want to be. This is exactly why there's no difference in the generosity of Christians and non-Christians in America. We actually all have an intention to be generous, but we listen to our fear. And this desire for self-preservation chokes out the generosity when it's time for us to act. So, Paul knew this. He knew this was a problem for all of these Corinthians. And he understood it. He wasn't being critical of them. But he says, all right, I want to help you move through your fear. We can't get rid of it. It doesn't ever disappear, but I want to help you move in spite of your fear. And so Paul introduces a different mindset to them. And this feels like comes out of left field, like a sharp left turn here. But he's about to tie it all together. So he says, okay, you Corinthians, you're scared to be as generous as you hoped and wanted and desired and intended to be. Well, I want you to remember this, he says. Remember, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. This is like farming 101, to which in our day and time, we listen to this and we go, well, what farmer would sow sparingly? Which is his way of saying, what farmer would take his seed and say, I'm going to leave this in the barn. I'm not going to put that in the ground. It's just dumb. You're like, of course farmers are putting all their seed in the ground, And what we forget is today we have this thing called crop insurance, all right? Crop insurance takes all the fear out Because crop insurance means I can plant it all, and if a flood comes and I lose it all, it doesn't matter, I'm still getting a check. Maybe not as great as I hope, but I'm getting a check. Or if a drought comes, okay, won't be as great as I hope, but I'm still getting a check. Everything will be fine. In the first century, they did not have crop insurance. So imagine you're living in a world where you took most of the money you had and you went and bought seed and you planted it, and then a drought hit and you hardly got any harvest. Well, now you're in a bind. Now you got to go figure out another job to make enough money to buy enough seed to plant again. And this time you plant and a flood comes and it wipes out your harvest. So you work another job and you do what you can to get enough seed. Now when it comes planting time, what are you going to do the third time? You're going to be scared to death. Now you see why some farmers in the first century would go, I don't think I'm going to plant it all. I think I'm going to leave a little bit back here. Now it's not rational, but it's understandable when you're dealing with that kind of fear. And this is Paul's point. He's going, okay, you guys know the farmers who, because of fear, just plant a little bit, well, they only reap a little bit. They can't get ahead doing that. Even though, their fear tells them to do it, it's the worst thing in the world for them to do. But the farmer who goes ahead and goes all in and plants it all, well, they reap a lot. They're the ones who get ahead. That doesn't mean they couldn't lose it again. They could. But they're guaranteed not to get ahead if they only sow a little. Everybody's kind of nodding their head like, well, yeah, what does that have to do with anything? Paul says, okay, well, that same principle, that same mindset is why you're struggling with your generosity. You're wanting to be generous sparingly because of the fear of what might happen. So here's the advice he gives them. He says, each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give. He says, I'm not twisting your arm. Not reluctantly or under compulsion. When you give out of fear or do something out of fear, it's always under compulsion. He says, no, don't do that, for God loves a cheerful giver. I mean, this is where he wants you to get. He wants you to be excited about it, to which we all go, I don't know how to get beyond the fear and be excited about giving much of anything. He says, well, I'll tell you, you have to think differently about what you have. And here was the key. He writes to him and he says this, God is able to bless you abundantly. In other words, don't forget where the seed comes from. Right? God can take care of you. He can bless you abundantly. So then, all things at all times, having all that you need, you'll abound in every good work. Now, what Paul is talking about here is counterintuitive. If you're not a follower of Jesus, you do whatever makes sense to you, and I will not criticize you at all. But for those of us who follow Jesus, when we began following Jesus, we were invited into a countercultural, counterintuitive economic system. And here's all I mean by that. What makes perfect sense if you move God out of the equation is self-preservation. You are responsible to make sure you take care of yourself and your family, and you have enough. And enough is a moving target. So as much as you want to be generous, you've always got to keep, because what if? That makes sense without Jesus. But he says, hey, when you begin following me, I'm going to ask you to flip that and to do something that feels really odd. I want you to start with generosity, not end with it. I want you to give to others, give to benefit others, give to impact others first. And the self-preservation gene kicks up in us and goes, oh, that scares me to death. And he goes, I know. I'm leading you into an area of uncertainty, and I'm asking you to trust me to make sure you and your family have all that you need. I'm asking you to give to others first. Oh, the fear just spiked. I know. But now you're going to have to see if I'm trustworthy and if I will provide whatever you need. But Jesus promises if you'll do it, I will provide. I will take care of you. If you'll put others before yourself, I'll make sure your needs are met. But that is so difficult to do. It's so difficult to step into. It's so difficult to realize, wait a minute, the weight of responsibility to take care of me. If I manage things God's way and if I pursue generosity Jesus' way, he takes that weight off my shoulders and he puts it on his. Well, yeah. Well, how do I know? You don't until you follow. You don't until you go. You don't know if Jesus will keep that promise until you trust him and step into the fear and the uncertainty and do it and see if he's trustworthy. That's the only way you know. But when you do that, You learn some things about Jesus you can't learn any other way. Your trust deepens and your relationship grows. So, here's what I want to encourage you to do if you're a Jesus follower. And if you're not, this is totally optional for you. You pick the awesome day to come. It's totally optional for you. But for those of us who are Jesus followers, Jesus has been pretty clear about how to manage everything he puts into our hands. He's been pretty clear about how he values generosity. So here's what I want to invite you to do. If this has been a struggle for you to develop a habit of generosity that leads to a heart of generosity, if that's a struggle for you, I get it. It's a struggle for you because of the fear we all feel. What I would invite you to do is pick a time period and to take a step into that fear. You don't have to do it forever, but to pick a time period and take a step, and I'm about to give you 3 different options of steps you could take. You could pick 30 days, you could pick 90 days, it's entirely up to you. Pick a time period and take a step in the direction Jesus invites you to take, and then just see if he's trustworthy. The fear is not going to go away. You're going to have to take the step into the fear. You're going to have to deal with the fear. But if he is trustworthy, if he promises or keeps his promise and does what he says he'll do, then the fear will start to dissipate a little more and a little more. So for some of you, here's a step you might be able to take. And it's simply to make generosity a priority. Because you've always wanted to be a generous person, you had the intention, you've never had the action. So you have to make it a priority. And I'm not talking about the one-offs, the spontaneous generosity. I'm saying you're going to make it a priority. So when I say priority, what I mean is you decide for a period of time that every time you get paid, the first thing you're going to do is give a certain amount of that away to some cause, to some people, to something you believe in. It doesn't have to be here. You pick whatever you care about and wherever you trust, okay? You take a percentage, you take an amount of your check, and for 30 days, for 90 days, you're going to give first to help somebody else. What we tend to do is we take care of ourselves first, pay all our bills, do our stuff, and if we have any left over, I want to help somebody. Jesus invites those of us who are Jesus followers, he asks us to flip that, to give first and to trust him to provide the rest. So for some of you, you need to pick, entirely up to you, pick a time period, find a cause, and just say, I'm going to give first for this period, and I'm going to see what happens. Now, for some of you, you do that, but you've got a step to take as well. Like there's an amount that you do, and you set it up to be recurring, to go to this place or to this place or to whatever. But for you, the step may be towards generosity, that you're going to become a percentage giver, that your generosity is going to be defined by percentage, not amount. And this is a really hard step. This one's scary too, because it's easy to pick an amount and say, I'm going to give this much away, and then our income grows, and we never really miss it, and it's all good. And we don't have any idea how much we actually gave of everything we had. This is why Christians give 2.5%, and it's no different than non-Christians. They don't even know. We don't even know what percentage we're giving away. But the fear drives us to the exact same behavior and the exact same outcome as people who don't follow Jesus. So if you don't know what percentage of your income you give away, you should pick a percentage. I don't care what percentage you pick. It's up to you. 2%, 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, I don't care. You pick whatever percentage you think you need to pick that's going to force you to trust God a little bit. It's going to help you become more generous. And then pick a time period and give that percentage away first every single time you're paid. It's scary, I know. It's just as scary as trying to become a priority giver for the first time. It's scary. But you got to move through the fear if you actually want to be generous. Now, some of you do both of those, and you're probably the Southern Baptist in the room, okay? Because if you grew up in church, especially Southern Baptist, I'm sure there's probably some others. I just grew up Southern Baptist, so it was like, you should give 10%, right? So you're like, I have nailed this. I got this. I've been doing this for years. Here's the step for those of you who practice the first two. You should take a step in being progressive in your generosity. Now, here's what I mean by that. If you have given 10% your whole life, or whatever percentage, you pick a percentage, it's really hard way back here because you didn't have as much. But as your income grows over time and the percentage stays the same, you have more and more margin, more and more extra over and over and over again. And you may be at a point now with whatever percentage you give away, it does not cause you to have to trust God at all. As a matter of fact, it doesn't scare you anymore. which is a sign, I hate to tell you this, it's a sign your generosity probably needs to grow. Because again, the ultimate point of generosity is not just I'm trying to fund something I care about. It's I'm trying to let God change my heart. I'm trying to become a generous person. I'm trying to learn how to be the kind of person that's generous all the time, everywhere, and grow my relationship with my Heavenly Father. So you may need to pick a different percentage. Every year my wife and I sit down. We'll do it in a couple months. We sit down and we talk about and pray about what percentage of our income we feel like we should give away. And it typically changes from year to year because we know when we get comfortable, we probably need to go a little further. And it's not about just the cause we're trying to help. It's about us. So I would encourage you, if you're a Jesus follower, to pick one of these steps, pick a period of time, and try it. Just try it. Because here's what I know. I have never met a generous, arrogant person. If you're generous, I'm not talking you give big amounts sometimes. That doesn't mean you're generous. When you're truly generous, you always think about others for yourself. You're using your money for others before yourself. I've never met a person like that who struggled with pride. Generosity slays that monster. I've never met a generous person who had their hope in their stuff instead of in God. It slays that monster. I've never met a generous person who is greedy. Obviously, you can't do both. It slays that monster. I've never met a generous person who is consumed by fear. I didn't say the fear disappeared, but they're not consumed by it because they've learned they can trust their Heavenly Father. And if I could go a step further, I've never met generous people who ended up in divorce. I haven't. I've never met a generous couple who ended up there. I've never met generous people whose family just became a train wreck. I've never met generous people who had terrible friendships, terrible relationship with their kids, with their boss, whoever. Because money doesn't just impact your bank account. It impacts all the things you actually care about, which is why you want to learn to be generous. Because it pays off in all the areas that matter most. It changes you, which changes how you relate to all the people around you. So would you pay attention to what money's doing to you? And would you be intentional to practice generosity, to learn to trust God in what may be the most difficult area to trust Him? But it will lower the voice of fear. And it will raise what you care about most. It'll help remove the barrier between your intentions and your actions. And you'll end up being the person that you actually want to be. Let me pray for us. Father, give us the wisdom to know what to do with this, to figure out what step we need to take. But more importantly, give us the courage to do it because it is scary. And would you show up in the middle of it and help us to learn how trustworthy you are? And help us to become the kind of people who have the life and the relationships that we actually want to have. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.